They judged him by his clothes. They kicked him out like he was nobody. But just wait until you see who he really is. What happened next left an entire bar speechless. Stay with us until the end, because the lesson this man delivers might just change the way you see the world. The dusty light of late afternoon spilled through the narrow windows of the roadside bar, casting long shadows across worn floors and scarred tabletops. It wasn't the kind of place people dressed up for. It wasn't the kind of place people noticed anyone at all. And maybe that's exactly why he chose it. Jason stepped inside quietly, carrying with him the weight of a long day and the dust of unfamiliar roads. His clothes were simple, slightly torn at the hem, streaked with dried sweat and the fine grit of backcountry filming. His boots were scuffed, his collar loose, his beard thick with the texture of fatigue. He didn't look like anyone, and that, as always, was deliberate. The air inside was warm, slightly sour with spilled beer and old wood, and filled with the idle murmur of patrons who had come to drink, complain, and forget the world for a little while. A jukebox hummed faintly in the corner. The bartender barely glanced up. A few men played cards near the back. No one recognized him. That was good. He made his way to the far corner, quiet, away from the laughter and light, and settled into the booth with a kind of quiet grace that few ever noticed. His hands, though roughened by years of training and action, moved with precision. He ordered nothing, just sat. Still, present, watching, breathing. It should have ended there. But injustice has a way of sniffing out dignity as if it were a challenge. The moment came slow, like a storm forming in the distance. It started with a glance, then two, then a narrowing of eyes from behind the bar. A man stepped out from the back hallway, not in a rush, but with the stride of someone who thought the floor belonged to him. Clean shirt, slicked hair, gold chain above a polished name tag. The kind of man who weighed people in seconds and made decisions based on shoes, smell, or silence. He didn't like what he saw. Jason barely acknowledged him. His posture didn't change, but the air around him shifted. He felt the stare. It didn't come with words, not yet, but it came sharp. Then came the approach. The man stood in front of the table, arms folded, jaw set like stone. His voice didn't rise, but it didn't need to. It had that rehearsed tone, the practiced cruelty of someone who knew how to dress, condescension in politeness. He gestured toward the door with a smile that didn't touch his eyes. He didn't see a man resting. He saw a problem, a blemish, a disruption to his carefully curated image of control. Jason didn't react. He didn't argue, didn't explain. He simply looked up once, calmly, not to challenge, but to acknowledge. That was enough. But silence, to small men, feels like defiance. And so the man spoke louder. The words came sharper now, crueler. Something about standards, about appearances, about how some people didn't belong in places like this. Every word was coated in venom disguised as policy. A few heads in the bar turned, but no one said anything. Some sipped their drinks harder. Others avoided eye contact. That same familiar dance. A crowd that watches but won't act. Jason stood slowly, not as a threat, just as a man choosing not to be cornered. But that only triggered more aggression. The man took a step forward, puffing his chest, blocking the aisle. And in that moment, right then, humiliation was no longer casual. It was deliberate, public, designed to break. Voices quieted around them. The jukebox kept playing, oblivious. One of the card players paused mid-hand. A woman behind the bar pretended to clean a glass that was already spotless. And then it happened. The man, still in control of nothing but his own illusion, pointed at the door. His final words weren't shouted, but they echoed. Final, cold, executed like a sentence. Jason didn't flinch. He turned, walked slowly toward the exit, each step controlled, measured, respectful. and yet the tension followed him like a shadow. No one said a word. No one stopped it. No one even offered a glance of solidarity. The shame wasn't just in the words, but in the silence that protected them. As Jason reached the door, the light outside spilling onto the threshold, he stopped. Just for a second. He didn't look angry, didn't look broken. He simply turned his head, slowly, and scanned the room. One by one, his eyes found every face. Not to accuse, but to remember. Not a word was spoken. Then he stepped out, and the door clicked shut behind him. What none of them knew, what not a single person in that room could possibly suspect, was that the man they had just cast out would soon own the very ground they stood on. 40 minutes passed, long enough for the dust to settle, but not long enough for the silence to fade. Inside the bar, the noise returned gradually, first in short bursts, then with growing confidence. Laughter came back in patches. The clinking of glasses picked up rhythm. Conversations resumed, though they carried a tension beneath their surface, like chords just slightly out of tune. The manager stood behind the bar now, postured like a king who'd warded off a threat. He relished in his own authority, grinning at a few nearby patrons and offering comments too loud to be natural. He spoke of standards, of protecting the establishment's atmosphere. He reminded the regulars, without anyone asking, that the bar wasn't a place for vagrants, and that certain appearances, even if quiet and polite, just didn't belong. A few customers nodded, but the gestures were thin. Something hung in the room. It wasn't guilt, it wasn't pride, it was something in between. A discomfort, a question left unanswered. No one said it out loud, but they all felt it. The man they'd just watched being thrown out, he hadn't reacted like someone weak. He hadn't looked away like someone ashamed. He had left something behind, and whatever it was, it hadn't stopped echoing. The minutes stretched on. The manager moved from table to table, pretending to check in, but really searching faces, needing approval, needing validation. The louder he got, the more hollow it all sounded. Then came the sound that stopped it all. A soft creak. The front door opened. The air changed instantly. There was no wind, no music shift, no warning, just a stillness, sudden and sharp, like the bar itself had inhaled and forgotten how to exhale. Two men stepped inside. One led, one followed. The first was unmistakable now. Gone was the dust, the sweat, the loose collar and worn boots. In their place stood a man carved in confidence, dark suit tailored to silent perfection, shoulders squared, gait controlled. His beard had been trimmed, his eyes sharp and unwavering. He didn't need to speak. The room remembered him before it understood it had. Jason. Behind him, a second man, older, subtle, grey temples, precise movements, no jewelry, no smile. Just presence. Quiet power wrapped in stillness. The kind of man people rarely noticed, until it was too late. His eyes scanned the bar once, calculating everything without emotion. He didn't need to introduce himself. His silence said enough. The manager froze mid-step. His spine stiffened, his smile twitched. For a second, just one, his hand hovered in uncertainty, unsure whether to reach for a menu, a handshake, or an excuse. But pride is a stubborn mask. He straightened it quickly. With an awkward chuckle, he adjusted his collar and stepped forward, arms spreading slightly in mock welcome. The same voice that had expelled Jason earlier now dressed itself in courtesy. He offered pleasantries, mentioned confusion, asked if there had been a mistake earlier, pretended not to remember what had happened, though everyone could see in his eyes that he remembered exactly. Jason said nothing. He didn't glance around the room. He didn't acknowledge the stares from the corner tables or the sudden hush that spread like fog across the patrons. He walked forward, steady, slow, deliberate. His shoes echoed faintly against the wood floor. He wasn't here for revenge. He wasn't here for apology. He was here for resolution. The older man beside him opened a leather folder. It wasn't theatrical. It wasn't slow. It was methodical, like paperwork being passed across a boardroom table. He retrieved a document, neatly folded, ink still fresh. A seal pressed into the corner. He held it between his fingers, eyes locked on the manager. No words spoken, no introductions given. The manager's face shifted. His fake smile faltered. The room began to stir. Chairs creaked. Glasses stilled mid-air. Whispers tangled themselves into silence. Even the jukebox seemed to lower its hum. Something had shifted again. But this time it wasn't shame or uncertainty. It was power. Real power. The kind that doesn't announce itself. The kind that just is. The kind that walks into a room and everyone feels it before they understand it. The manager blinked. His fingers twitched at his side. He tried to laugh again, but it caught in his throat. He looked from Jason to the man beside him, then back again. Still, no one spoke. And then Jason stopped. Right in front of him. No anger, no posture, just presence. He looked the manager in the eye, not with contempt, not with pity, with certainty. Like a man who knew exactly where this moment was going. And then the document shifted in the older man's hands. Just enough for the gold seal to catch the light. Just enough for the title at the top to be visible. Just enough for the weight of it all to settle. And just like that, the entire bar held its breath. In that frozen moment, before a single word could be spoken, everyone watching realized one truth. This wasn't a visit. This was a reckoning, and the man they had dismissed was about to redefine everything. The silence stretched thin, like a wire pulled taut, humming with tension no one could name but everyone could feel. The paper in the older man's hand gleamed slightly under the hanging bulb above the bar. It wasn't flamboyant. It wasn't dramatic. It was just official. The kind of paper that changes ownership. The kind of paper that rewrites control. No one moved. Jason remained still. The manager finally reached out to take the document, but the older man didn't offer it. He simply unfolded it himself and placed it flat on the countertop. Precisely, cleanly, like setting down the final move in a long, quiet game. There, in plain black ink, were the words no one expected to see. Acquisition agreement, 50% stake in property and operations. The signature line beneath it remained empty, only for a moment. Then Jason stepped forward. He took the pen that was already placed beside the document. Without a word, without theatrics, he signed. One name. Nothing more. Not to prove anything, not to make a point, just because it was time. The older man nodded. Once, it was done. And just like that, the bar changed hands. Not entirely, but enough. Enough to shift the axis of power, enough to silence the room more effectively than any shout ever could. The manager blinked. He started to stammer, first small words, then longer ones. He tried to laugh, to explain, to fabricate something that sounded like understanding, but it was too late. He spoke too fast, too loud, reaching for control that no longer belonged to him. His voice cracked as he insisted there had been a mistake, that if he had only known, he would have what? Shown respect, treated someone like a human being. Jason didn't answer. He didn't even look at him. He turned slowly, calmly, toward the heart of the bar. He walked with the same measured steps he had used when leaving earlier. But now the steps sounded different. Not because they were louder, but because every eye in the room followed them. He reached the bar counter and stood behind it, not to take a drink, not to claim a throne, but to see the room from where the manager had stood just an hour before. His gaze moved slowly, deliberately, across the faces that had once looked away. No anger, no accusation, just presence, the kind that exposes people without a single word. And then, for the first time since re-entering the bar, he spoke. Not to the crowd, not to the room, just to the man beside him. 5 words, 5 quiet words, and they changed everything. He is no longer part of this. No one questioned what it meant. The manager opened his mouth again, but nothing coherent came out. The words were there, somewhere, but they had no weight anymore. His authority had evaporated, and with it, the attention he had once commanded. The room was no longer his to fill. The older man made a subtle gesture to a staff member, a woman who had been watching from the back. She nodded quietly and moved toward the manager with calm purpose. He looked around, confused, desperate for support, for someone to speak, for someone, anyone, to say this wasn't happening. But no one moved. Not one person defended him. He had made his choice hours ago, when he measured a man by dirt and fabric instead of dignity. Now the silence he had once relied on had turned against him. It no longer protected his pride. It exposed his failure. He stepped back, then again. The woman guided him gently but firmly toward the door. His steps were clumsy now, as if the floor that had once supported him refused to cooperate. At the threshold, he stopped, looking over his shoulder, waiting for someone to stop this, to undo it. But there were no objections, no loyal glances, no second chances, only stillness. Only Jason, standing tall behind the bar, watching without judgment, but with absolute finality. The door opened. The wind outside caught the edge of the silence. And then, the door closed behind him. For a long moment, no one in the bar moved, no one breathed. And in that stillness, as the dust began to settle again, they all understood. The man they had watched leave earlier hadn't returned for vengeance. He had returned to teach them something they would never forget. He didn't stay behind the bar. He didn't linger in the power he now held. That wasn't who he was. Jason stepped away quietly and returned to the very same corner booth he had occupied before. The seat was still slightly warm from the last person who'd used it. The wood groaned gently beneath his weight as he settled in, just as he had hours earlier. But now, nothing felt the same. The space around him was no longer casual. It was sacred. The hum of conversation had not returned. The bar, once filled with careless chatter and ambient noise, now rested under a hush so heavy it felt physical. The kind of silence that forces people to look inward, whether they want to or not. Across the room, a young server, nervous, hesitant, but holding something like admiration behind his eyes, walked toward Jason with trembling hands and placed a single drink on the table. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. His glance carried more than words ever could. Gratitude, respect, shame, and something else, hope. Jason offered no reaction. He didn't nod. He didn't smile. He simply looked down at the glass, then out toward the rest of the room. No movement. No need. The atmosphere was doing the speaking for him now. People who had once raised their glasses in judgment now kept them close to their chests. Customers who had laughed at whispered insults now stared at their reflections in the bottom of their drinks. No one met his gaze. Not anymore. They had seen what he was made of, and more importantly, they had seen what they were made of too. One by one, they shrank in their seats, not from fear, but from recognition. A few glanced toward the door, as if escape might offer relief. Others shifted in place, burdened by something they couldn't name. Guilt doesn't shout. It settles. Jason sat in that silence, not to gloat, not to watch them squirm, but because he understood something they hadn't. Until now. That dignity isn't loud, and respect isn't given when demanded. It's earned when you stand for something, even when you stand alone. He let the moment breathe. Let them feel it. Let them remember it. Then, without finishing his drink, he rose. The chair slid back with the same quiet authority he had brought into every room his entire life. He adjusted his coat with slow precision, walked across the bar floor with that same steady rhythm, and stopped at the door. His hand touched the handle, but before he pushed it open, he paused, just once, and turned. Every eye followed, some with shame, some with awe, all with silence. And with the same calm, unwavering voice that had shattered a man's arrogance without ever raising in volume, he spoke. One sentence. Measured. Clean. Unforgettable. The way you treat someone who seems to have nothing says everything about what you truly have. He opened the door and stepped into the night. No music resumed. No whispers followed. The silence remained. Heavy, reflective, complete. He hadn't shouted, he hadn't struck, he hadn't even raised his voice, but somehow he had said more than anyone ever had within those walls. Slowly, as if moved by invisible strings, a few patrons reached for their wallets. One placed a generous tip on the table without looking up. Another turned toward the young server and offered a quiet apology, eyes lowered. Two men stood and left, their shoulders heavy with the weight of their own thoughts. The bartender stood behind the counter, his hands idle, watching the door as if expecting it to open again. But it didn't. The bar would never be the same, not because of who had walked in, but because of what he left behind. Respect, not demanded, deserved, a lesson, not forced, felt, and a silence more powerful than any voice. The young server collected the empty glass slowly, handling it as if it were something sacred. He placed it behind the bar and turned to face one of the lingering customers, an older man who had watched everything unfold from the shadows of the back corner. The man asked softly, more to himself than anyone else. Who was that man? The server paused, then answered with quiet certainty. Someone who doesn't need to raise his voice, because the whole world listens when he chooses to speak. He didn't yell, he didn't fight, but with just one sentence. He changed everything. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more powerful, true-to-life lessons like this one. Hit the like button, leave a comment with what you would have done in that moment, and share this with someone who needs to be reminded. True strength doesn't need to shout.